October 14, 1943, 25,000 feet above Germany, Staff Sergeant Michael Romano crouched in the cramped tail section of his B-17, hands gripping twin .50 caliber machine guns that weighed more than he did. Through the small plexiglass window, he watched a Focke-Wulf 190 positioning for an attack run. 6 o'clock low, the bomber's most vulnerable angle. Romano squinted through his ring-and-bead sight. The primitive aiming system, essentially two metal posts he had to align with his target, offered no compensation for speed, no calculation for deflection, no help whatsoever as both aircraft hurtled through the sky at combined closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. He fired. Tracers arced harmlessly behind the diving fighter. The FW190's cannons flashed. 20-millimeter shells tore through aluminum like tissue paper. This scene repeated itself 291 times that day across the Second Schweinfurt Raid. The 8th Air Force dispatched 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses deep into Germany without fighter escort. By nightfall, 60 bombers, more than 20% of the attacking force, would be shot down. Another 138 returned so badly damaged they would never fly again. 600 American airmen were dead. The mathematics were brutal and unsustainable. At that rate, no bomber crew would statistically survive their required 25 missions. Post-mission analysis revealed the grim truth. Tail gunners, supposedly the bomber's last line of defense against the preferred German attack angle, achieved hit rates below 8%. Fighter pilots needed merely attack from the rear, endure a few seconds of inaccurate return fire, and methodically destroy America's billion-dollar strategic bombing campaign, one fortress at a time. Senior commanders gathered at 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe, England. The defensive armament that was supposed to make the B-17 a flying fortress had failed catastrophically. Without a solution, daylight precision bombing, the entire strategic doctrine, faced cancellation. What these commanders did not know was that, at that very moment, on a cold, hard stand at Bassingbourn Airfield, a 22-year-old tail gunner with barely a high school education was sketching a design in his logbook that violated multiple Army Air Forces regulations, a design that weapons engineers would call mechanically impossible, a design that would triple tailgun accuracy and save thousands of American lives. To understand why Romano's innovation proved so revolutionary, one must first understand the impossible problem tail gunners faced in 1943. The B-17 entered combat with a defensive philosophy borrowed from naval warfare. Bristling with enough machine guns to create overlapping fields of fire, the bombers theoretically protected themselves through sheer volume of lead. Army Air Force's promotional materials called it a flying battleship. Reality proved brutally different. Staff Sergeant Michael Romano reported to Bassingbourn Airfield, England in August 1943 as a replacement tail gunner for the 91st Bomb Group. He was a former factory worker from Pittsburgh. No college degree, no engineering background. Barely 19 years old when he enlisted. The Army trained him for 6 weeks how to clear jams, estimate range, and pray his shots connected. Romano's assigned position, the tail gunner station, was barely larger than a coffin. He had to kneel on a bicycle seat, feet braced against the aircraft structure, hands wrestling 84-pound Browning M2 machine guns through a cramped field of fire. The guns pivoted on a simple yoke mount, and his aiming system consisted of a ring-and-bead sight, like sights on a frontier rifle. To hit a diving fighter, Romano had to estimate the target's speed relative to his own aircraft, calculate the deflection angle,
compensate for bullet drop over distance, and execute all those calculations while wearing bulky gloves in -40-degree temperatures. He had to fire before the German pilots' cannons came into effective range. Expert gunners from peacetime aerial gunnery schools, attempting the same shots under controlled conditions, achieved hit rates barely exceeding 12%. In combat, stressed, oxygen-deprived, and under fire, actual hit rates plummeted to 6 to 8%. The Luftwaffe recognized this vulnerability immediately and evolved tactics accordingly. Attack from 6 o'clock low, accept 15 to 20 seconds of inaccurate tailgun fire at close range, and unleash devastating 20mm cannon strikes. Luftwaffe after-action reports described B-17 tail positions as marginally dangerous, accuracy insufficient to deter attacks. Losses mounted. August 17, 1943, the First Schweinfurt Raid, 60 bombers lost. October 8, 1943, Bremen Raid, 30 bombers lost. October 10, 1943, Münster Raid, 30 bombers lost. The 8th Air Force hemorrhaged bombers faster than factories could replace them. General Henry Hap Arnold in Washington received casualty reports and questioned whether daylight bombing remained viable. Engineers proposed solutions: more guns, bigger caliber, powered turrets. Boeing's Cheyenne Modification Center began designing an improved tail turret, but development timelines stretched into 1944. Powered turret prototypes existed, but installation required removing the entire tail section, a month-long factory modification impossible to implement on bombers already in England. Meanwhile, men died. Michael Romano flew his first combat mission on August 19, 1943, from Gilze-Reyen Airfield, Netherlands. He fired 480 rounds at 3 attacking FW190s and believed he scored hits. Gun camera footage reviewed later revealed every tracer passed harmlessly behind the targets. The fighters destroyed 2 bombers in his formation. After his third mission, Romano stayed on the hard stand after landing, staring at his guns. His hand shook from the physical exhaustion of manhandling 84-pound weapons through sustained fire while kneeling at altitude. That night, he sketched his first design concept. The problem, he realized, wasn't the gun or even the mount. It was the tail gunners fired blind, chasing targets they could not properly track, aiming at points in space they could not accurately predict. What he needed was something the Army Air Forces hadn't provided, a way to see where his bullets would actually go before he pulled the trigger. He needed a reflector sight. But the tail position's cramped quarters made standard reflector installation impossible unless someone broke the rules. Romano, born in Pittsburgh in 1924, had dropped out of high school at 16 to work the steel mills during his father's illness. He operated blast furnaces, repaired machinery, and learned practical metallurgy through trial and error rather than textbooks. When America entered the war, he enlisted and was assigned to aerial gunnery school, not because of any demonstrated aptitude, but because he was small enough to fit in the tail position. At 5'7" and 145 pounds, he could squeeze into spaces that eliminated larger recruits. He completed basic gunnery training at Harling, Texas, scoring merely average on range qualifications. Instructors noted adequate trigger discipline and satisfactory weapons maintenance. Nobody identified him as exceptional, but Romano possessed one trait his training record didn't capture. He could not accept systems that didn't work. After his 5th combat mission on October 4, 1943, Frankfurt, Romano's frustration reached critical mass. His bomber returned with 78 flak holes and damage from 2 fighter attacks. He had fired 620 rounds and hit nothing. His best friend, the tail gunner on a neighboring B-17, had died when a Bf-109 attacked from dead astern, and Romano's counterfire failed to deter it. That night, Romano walked to the aircraft revetment carrying a maintenance flashlight and his logbook. He climbed into the tail section, still reeking of cordite and hydraulic fluid, and stared at the ring-and-bead sight. The moment of insight arrived not as dramatic revelation, but as simple observation. Romano noticed his reflection in the curved plexiglass window. In that distorted mirror, he could see behind his aircraft's tail, angles the ring-and-bead sight could never cover. He sketched rapidly. What if he mounted small mirrors at strategic angles, giving him peripheral vision beyond the gun sight's limited field of view? What if he angled them to show the tracer paths from his own guns, letting him walk fire onto targets by watching the reflection rather than squinting through inadequate iron sights? Then the crucial leap. Combine mirrors with a simple reflector sight, a piece of glass etched with an aiming reticle, positioned to let him track targets while simultaneously watching his tracer patterns in the peripheral mirrors. It was not a true computing gun sight like the sophisticated gyroscopic systems in fighters. It was a jury-rigged combination of reflective surfaces and improvised aiming references. But it might work.
Romano spent 3 hours sketching designs, measuring angles and calculating sight lines with a carpenter's protractor salvaged from the base machine shop. By dawn, he had detailed drawings of a mirror-assisted reflector sight system that required no powered components, no complex installation, and no factory modification. He also had a problem. His design violated Army Air Force's Technical Order Z0120EG2, which prohibited unauthorized modifications to defensive armament. Installation without approval could result in court-martial. Romano decided he didn't care. He found his co-conspirator in the base sheet metal shop, Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman, a 38-year-old aircraft mechanic from Detroit who had served in the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression. When Romano approached him on October 7th with sketches and a request for off-the-books fabrication work, Kellerman studied the drawings for less than 5 minutes. "This is illegal," he said flatly. "Yes, Sergeant," Romano replied. "You're asking me to modify defensive armament without engineering approval, which violates about 6 different technical orders." Kellerman looked up from the drawings. "When do you fly again?" "Tomorrow, Munster. Now we better work fast." They began after midnight in the corner of the maintenance hangar using scrap materials Kellerman had unofficially requisitioned. Curved mirrors from damaged navigation equipment, plexiglass from shattered canopy sections, aluminum brackets from written-off airframes. The reflector sight itself, the crucial component, came from a wrecked P-47 Thunderbolt fighter. Kellerman removed the undamaged gun sight assembly designed for nose-mounted installation and re-engineered mounting brackets to fit the tail gunner's cramped position. The mirror system proved more challenging. Romano wanted 3 small convex mirrors positioned to provide peripheral vision of tracer paths without obstructing his forward view. Kellerman fabricated adjustable brackets using sheet aluminum and ball socket joints from control surface linkages. They worked through the night, fitting components and testing sight lines. At 0430 hours, Kellerman installed the complete assembly in Romano's aircraft, a B-17G designated knockout dropper. The installation was crude. Brackets attached with standard aircraft bolts, mirrors fixed using safety wire, the reflector sight mounted to the gun yoke via a welded bracket that would horrify Boeing engineers. Nothing about the modification appeared in the aircraft's maintenance logbook.
At dawn briefing, Romano told no one about the new sight. His pilot, Lieutenant James Holbrook, didn't inspect the tail section before takeoff. The group commander didn't know. The squadron armament officer didn't know. They launched for Munster at 0800 hours.
Over Germany at 10:15 hours, a Bf-109 began its attack run at 6 o'clock low, closing fast. Romano swiveled his guns and squinted through the new reflector sight. The illuminated reticle floated in his field of vision, overlaying the target. In his peripheral vision, the mirrors showed his gun barrel's alignment angles and the tracer paths. He fired a 3-second burst. The tracer pattern visible in the mirrors showed he was shooting behind the target. He adjusted, leading the fighter by the reticle's diameter, and fired again. This time, the tracers and the target converged. The Bf-109's engine exploded. The fighter rolled inverted and spun toward Earth, trailing black smoke. Romano stared at his guns, then at the mirrors, then back at the empty sky where the fighter had flown seconds before. "Holy," he whispered into his oxygen mask. It worked. Romano landed at 13:40 hours with one confirmed kill, his first. The celebration lasted exactly 20 minutes. At 1400 hours, during a routine post-flight inspection, Crew Chief Master Sergeant Donald Pierce discovered the unauthorized modifications and reported them immediately to the squadron armament officer, Captain Richard Voss. "Sergeant Romano," Voss said with military precision, "would you care to explain the unauthorized equipment installed in your gun position?" Romano stood at attention. "Sir, I installed an improved sighting system." Voss barked that the modification violated Technical Order 0120EG2 and that unapproved modifications could compromise structural integrity, create fire hazards, or interfere with other systems. "Remove it immediately, or I'll have you court-martialed for destruction of government property," he warned. Romano replied that the system worked and pointed out his kill. Lieutenant Holbrook, the pilot, vouched for Romano's success, but Voss ordered the modification removed. Word spread through the 91st Bomb Group like wildfire. By evening, every gunner on base knew about Romano's illegal mirror sight and his first kill. Opinions divided. Veteran gunners crowded Romano's table with questions about installation difficulty, field of view, and whether the mirrors could withstand slipstream stress. Engineering officers and senior maintenance staff reacted with alarm. Captain Theodore Morrison, the group's assistant armament officer, convened an emergency meeting on October 11th. 14 officers attended. The tone was hostile. Morrison argued discipline. A sergeant had performed unauthorized modifications using salvaged components of unknown provenance, setting a dangerous precedent. Major William Calhoun, operations officer, countered that Romano had shot down an enemy fighter, and that the modification improved hit rates even marginally. It warranted testing. The meeting devolved into shouting until Colonel Stanley Ray, commanding officer of the 91st Bomb Group, a 53-year-old career officer who had flown bombers in the First World War, listened for 90 minutes without interrupting. Then he